Hello everyone, this is Neal Davis from Digital Cloud Training. I've recently retaken my Certified Cloud Practitioner Exam to see what's going on, and I've also collated lots of feedback from my students and found out what is going on in the exam today. So what I've done is I've updated some of my course and my practice questions, including adding a whole bunch of new practice questions just in the last few days. What I'm going to do in this video is walk you through 10 of those questions. Now, don't worry if you're close to your exam already. Nothing much has changed in the exam, really. It's just a few subtle changes, a couple of services that have come into the exam. So, by and large, it's pretty much the same as it has been for quite a long time now. You're going to see the same style of questions, and the same curriculum is going to be tested on in the exam. So let's get started now, and I'm going to walk you through 10 questions to help you understand how to answer them and work out a bit of a strategy for how you answer questions in the exam. So let's get started. The first question asks, a company recently took up an enterprise level AWS support plan and has a question relating to their AWS account. Who's the primary point of contact they should direct the question to? So we've got a few options here. Now let's start at the top and work down. Is it an AWS solutions architect? Well, no, not for an account issue. What about cloud support associates? Now, cloud support associates are used for email support for people on the developer plan. If you're in a plan above developer, then you get cloud support engineers, a different team. We then have the AWS Partner Network. Well, the AWS Partner Network is a network of services companies, consulting companies, and technology partners. So that's not going to help here. You're not going to direct your query to them. So the last one turns out to be the right answer, the concierge support team. If you're on an enterprise level support plan, you get a concierge support team and you can speak to them about your account issues. So let's select that answer and click on check. Sure enough, that's correct. And let's just scroll down and go straight to the next question. What is the function of Amazon EC2 autoscaling? This is one of those ones where the question is just getting straight to the point. There's nothing too much wordy in here. They just ask you the question outright. Now, EC2 autoscaling is absolutely core knowledge for any AWS exam. You've got to know what this is. It's key to designing applications in the cloud. So what does it do? Let's start at the top again. Does it scale the number of EC2 instances in or out automatically based on demand? Well, that sounds about right to me because that's what it does. So EC2 autoscaling means that it actually launches EC2 instances and terminates EC2 instances. And it can scale your application based on how much demand it's receiving. So for example, you can create a policy that tracks the target utilization of the CPU of your instances and tries to keep it at 60%. If your CPUs become overburdened, it will just launch new instances and make sure that you've got enough capacity there to handle the load on your application. When your application gets lower demand, EC2 autoscaling can then terminate some instances, and that keeps your cost base a bit lower. So I like that answer. I'm going to select that one. I always like to select the answer that I think is correct, and then let's go and try and eliminate the other ones and make sure that we're 100% sure that there's nothing else here that's better. In this case, I think we're pretty sure that that's the right one, but I always like to check anyway. Does it scale the size of instances up or down automatically based on demand? Very similar, but the wording's slightly different. So rather than scaling instances in or out, it's scaling instances up or down. So you've got to understand for the exam the difference between scaling out and scaling up. Scaling out is where you would add additional instances. Scaling up is where you change the amount of CPU and RAM that's associated with your instance. So you give it more power. So in other words, you have a more powerful instance, or you have more instances with scaling out. So in this case, EC2 autoscaling helps with scaling out, not with scaling up. So that's not a correct answer. Does it automatically update the pricing model based on demand? No, it can't change the pricing model. Does it modify the network throughput of instances? No, that would be associated mainly with the instance type. And you can't change instance types through autoscaling, which is what you would do, for instance, if you wanted to scale up. You would change the instance type to one that has better network, maybe more CPU and more RAM. But that would be scaling up, and that's something you have to do through the console or through the CLI. It's not something EC2 autoscaling will do for you. So let's check that answer. And that's the one. So let's move on to the next question. Which services are involved in reducing application latency and increasing performance for end users? And this time we've got to select two. With the Cloud Practitioner exam, there's two styles of question. One is where you have one answer and 3 incorrect answers, distractors. And the other is where you have 5 answers and 2 of them are going to be correct. I think they say in the exam guide that they can have more than 5 or more than 2 answers, but it's very rare to see that on the Cloud Practitioner. So which services are involved in reducing latency and increasing performance for applications? Is it CloudFront? Well, CloudFront is a content delivery network. It caches media files around the world. That means if you're trying to get a media file from an application and you're located another side of the world to where the original content is, there should be a cache that's local to you or closer to you. And that means it will improve the performance of downloading that particular media asset. And that reduces latency as well. So it's closer to you, lower latency, better performance because it's faster. So CloudFront is a good answer. Now, what about S3? Well, in the case of CloudFront, S3 can sit behind CloudFront. So for example, S3 is where your original media might be, and that could be in the US. And then you have CloudFront, and CloudFront is caching that data, let's say, in Asia. And people who are in Asia are then able to access it locally. So CloudFront is associated with increasing performance and reducing latency. S3 isn't. CloudFront is giving it that capability. What about workspaces? Workspaces is managed desktops in the cloud, so it's got nothing to do with latency and performance. ECS is the Elastic Container Service that's used for running Docker containers, so that's not really about increased performance or lower latency. Amazon Elasticache, however, is associated with reducing latency and increasing performance. How does it do that? It's a cache and it sits in front of other types of databases. So for example, you have a relational database like RDS sitting behind it, and you cache responses to certain queries in Elasticache, and that helps users to access that data faster. So that's a good answer. I like these two. Let's click on check. So that's good, and let's continue to the next question. A cloud practitioner needs to decide which S3 storage class to use for storing copies of backup data. The storage must provide rapid access when needed, but resiliency can be low. Which storage class is most suitable? You've really got to know the basics of the different storage classes on AWS in S3 for the exam. It's really important. So let's look at the requirements here. We have copies of backup data. So we might have the original data somewhere. There's a backup of that data, and we're now storing a copy of that backup data. So it's an extra backup, which is why the resiliency can be low, which it states here. So we need rapid access. We have to be able to access it immediately. That actually rules out 2 of these, Glacier and Glacier Deep Archive. Those are used for archiving, very low cost, but you can't access your data immediately. It's not rapid access. You have to wait for your archive to be restored before you can access it. So that rules those 2 out. We've then got standard. Well, standard will give you very high availability and high durability. And it doesn't give you any discounts. There's no discount. Standard is just the standard price for S3. Whereas the other tiers can give you some cost benefits. So you're not going to get anything out of standard here, but it might be the right answer. We just got to check this last one. What about one zone IA? Well, that sounds better. One zone IA is stored in one zone. It's ideal for infrequently accessed use cases, the IA part. And so that's ideal for this because this is a copy of backup data. So if that zone fails or accessibility to the zone fails, then it doesn't matter too much. We've still got the original data and a copy of the data. So it's lower resiliency but lower cost. So I think that's a better answer. So let's choose that one and click on check. Sure enough, that's the right answer. And here is a table showing you the storage classes on S3. And you can see one zone IA here. As you can see under availability, all of the other classes have 4 nines or 3 nines of availability. Whereas one zone IA has 99.5%, so it's a bit lower. And you can see that's because it has 1 availability zone versus 3 in all these other ones. So just 1 AZ here. Now, also note that you do get a retrieval fee with these storage classes here. So though the actual cost of storing data is lower, there is a retrieval fee. So sometimes you have to calculate that into your costs. And depending on how often you're going to retrieve it, that can become an issue. But in this case, I think that's definitely the best class. So let's continue to the next question. Which service can a cloud practitioner use to configure custom cost and usage limits and enable alerts for when defined thresholds are exceeded? There's quite a few tools around cost management and billing and alerting on billing, and you've really got to understand those for the exam. So let's work from the top down. Cost Explorer, that's good for exploring your costs, as the name suggests. So that's a way of looking at the itemized bill and trying to drill down and find out exactly how you're spending your money. Consolidated billing is associated with AWS organizations. It's a way that you can take multiple accounts, connect them into a single organization, and have one bill. So that's not going to help here. Trusted Advisor can give you some really useful information about the costs of your resources. Is there any way you can optimize the costs of your resources? But it's not going to be a place where we can set those limits and get an alert. Budgets is exactly what we need here. AWS Budgets is a service you can use to set limits, and then you get alerted. So let's click on check. That's all good. So let's move on to the next question. Which of the following types of recommendation does Trusted Advisor provide? Select 2. You really need to know AWS Trusted Advisor. So remember, this is about advising you on best practices for how you deploy your infrastructure on AWS. And it has best practices guidance in several different areas. And we need to work out what 2 of those are. So is it performance? Does it help you work out how to optimize the performance on your workloads on AWS? It does. So I like that answer. What about cost optimization? Yes, absolutely. It will help you to identify what you can do to lower your costs on AWS. So I like those 2. I've selected those. And then again, I'm going to go and make sure that the other 3 here are incorrect. So what about access auditing? Remember, auditing is something you should start thinking about CloudTrail when you hear auditing. That helps you audit API actions on your account. So it's not that one. Serverless architecture, it's not really going to help you much with serverless architecture. This tool will give you some recommendations on how you can optimize your infrastructure, but it doesn't help you build a serverless architecture. What about replatforming? So that would be where you move a workload from one type of hardware or one kind of configuration to another one. No, it doesn't go to that level, so it doesn't help you with replatforming. Performance and cost optimization are the best choices here. We'll just check those out. Those are correct. And you can see here, this is the dashboard from Trusted Advisor. And you can see a case here where there are some cost optimization options available where it's saying it can potentially save $7,500. And then under performance, security, fault tolerance, and service limits, we have some warnings and potentially some errors that need to be addressed. Moving on to the next question. Which AWS managed service can be used to process vast amounts of data using a hosted Hadoop framework? Now, this is a service that's been around a long time, but it's only really started coming onto the exam fairly recently. So which service uses Hadoop? Now, Hadoop is a framework of software that you can use to process really large amounts of data. So which service would you associate with that? In this case, there's no easy way to give this away. You either know it or you don't. So Hadoop is associated with something called Elastic MapReduce. So the EMR here should give that away. So that's not an AWS specific term. If you've heard of Elastic MapReduce, you might know already that it's associated with Hadoop. So Amazon EMR is the answer that I like. But let's look at the other ones. DynamoDB. Remember, DynamoDB is a NoSQL database. It's used mostly for transactional workloads. It's not something that you'd use for processing vast quantities of data. Athena is used for using SQL queries to query data on S3. So that's not the right answer. Lastly, Redshift is used for analytics, but it's used for storing large quantities of data in a columnar format so that you can query it effectively. It's not processing vast amounts of data, and it certainly doesn't use Hadoop. So EMR looks like the best answer. Let's check that one out. That's all good. So let's move on to the next question. Which benefits can an organization achieve by deploying AWS Global Accelerator? Now, this is another service that's crept onto the exam fairly recently. I haven't seen it before, but it has been around a little while now. So what is it? Well, it's a service that you can use when you have multiple deployments of your application in different parts of the world. So let's say you have your EC2 instances behind an application load balancer, and the same application is in 3 different regions, and you want to direct users to the region that's closest to them and reduce latency and increase performance. Well, that's what you would use Global Accelerator for. And it uses the CloudFront Edge network. So when you're connecting to it, you connect to the closest CloudFront Edge location. And then from there, you go over the AWS global network, so its own backbone. So let's have a look and try and fit the answers here. What are the benefits we get from Global Accelerator? Does it reduce the cost of deploying global services? No, that's not really its purpose. Does it cache content around the world to reduce latency? Well, that would be CloudFront. Remember, CloudFront is a content delivery network, and it stores data in those edge locations, so it's caching content. Global Accelerator is not caching content, but it's taking advantage of the CloudFront Edge network, so it uses it for its networking capabilities. Does it improve the availability of applications on AWS? Well, yes, it does, because you can now have multiple instances of your application running in multiple regions, and then your users are getting directed to not only the nearest region for performance purposes, but also to whatever's available. So if your application goes down or a region becomes inaccessible, then the users get redirected. So it does help with availability. What about latency, reducing latency? Absolutely, that's what we've just talked about. It helps reduce latency, increase performance. It does so through directing you to not only the closest region, but by using the CloudFront Edge network and the AWS global backbone, so their own internal network, to get better performance in accessing the application. Does it increase durability? No, it doesn't. It's got nothing to do with S3. So those are the 2 answers I like the most. A cloud practitioner requires a simple method to identify if unrestricted access to resources has been allowed by security groups. Which service can the cloud practitioner use? In our AWS accounts, we often end up with many security groups, sometimes with rules that are too permissive. They have too much open, or perhaps they're not restricted to the right audience. They might be too open. They allow anyone in the world to connect. So we need an easy way of finding that out. Now, CloudTrail is associated with API actions. So it's auditing the API actions on your account. So I don't like that one. VPC flow logs is about network data. It's about looking at the data on the network. Where did it go from? Where to? Which ports were used? Which protocols? Now, as much as you can glean quite a bit of information there, it's not a simple way of finding out how your security groups are configured. So what about Trusted Advisor? Well, that's exactly what Trusted Advisor does. It will give us some information about our security groups and highlight any concerns with the rule sets. So let's just eliminate CloudWatch as the last answer there. I like Trusted Advisor. CloudWatch is about performance monitoring. It's monitoring metrics about the performance of our resources, so that's not correct. So Trusted Advisor looks good. We'll check that one out. And that looks good. And here is a screenshot from the console with lots of security groups. And you can see we have different codings here on the left-hand side. We've either got a exclamation mark in a red circle or an exclamation mark in a triangle, indicating different levels of severity in terms of what it's found. So let's move on, and we've got one more question. An e-commerce company plans to use the AWS Cloud to quickly deliver new functionality in an iterative manner, minimizing time to market. Which feature of the cloud provides this functionality? Now, this is all about the benefits of the cloud and what you get from deploying applications on the cloud versus on premises. That's what AWS always love people to understand. So, is it cost effectiveness? Well, no, this is about speed to market. Cost effectiveness is not the issue here. We're not trying to lower cost. What about fault tolerance? You can build fault tolerance on AWS, but that's not, again, helping you to move really quickly, iteratively, get stuff out to market fast. What about agility? Agility, absolutely, I like that. Being agile means you're able to leverage the services of AWS to quickly deliver updates to your applications, bring new services to market, which gives you a competitive differentiation against your competition if they're not using those kind of features. So I like agility. I'm going to select that one. What about elasticity? Well, that's a great feature of the AWS Cloud, but it doesn't necessarily bring your services to market faster. So I think agility is correct. I'm going to click on check, and sure enough, that is the correct answer. So that's it for the walkthrough of 10 questions. Hopefully that helps you a little bit in understanding the style of question you're going to see on the exam. Of course, these aren't exact replicas. I can't do that. But what I'm doing is giving you questions that are very similar to what you're going to see on the real exam, and really including the same types of services and the same type of language to help you be able to answer those questions more easily. So I hope that was useful, and I wish you the best for your Cloud Practitioner exam.